So, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our next Secret Sunday session. We are here with the beautiful Lauren Cadillac. Thank you so much for joining us from America. I really do appreciate this. And basically, we're just going to talk today about food rules, guilt, and we're going to start off with Lauren. If you could just give us a little brief overview of who you are and what you do.
Sure. Thanks. Well, first and foremost, I'm excited to be here. So thanks for having me. As you mentioned, my name's Lauren Cadillac. I am a registered dietitian and a certified intuitive eating counselor. I'm also a certified personal trainer. Right now, I work in private practice. I have my own online practice that specializes in intuitive eating. So I use that framework to help my clients heal their relationship with food, break away from diet culture, get rid of the guilt and the rules and all the things we're going to chat about today. If anyone follows on Instagram, I am a Feel Good Dietitian. So that's kind of just my my little intro.
Beautiful. So I just want to kick off by starting with food rules and just outline the basics so people are aware of what they are. What are food rules?
I mean, food rules are just kind of, like any rule for anything else. You should do this, you shouldn't do that. And, with each different diet we go on, or each influencer we listen to, or diet book we read, everyone has their lists of shoulds and shouldn't. Eat this, not that, right? So there's rules around particular types of foods, right? So I should have, I don't want to get too specific with things, but there are foods that are good and there's foods that are bad. There might be rules around time of day, rules around exercise, right? So there's all of these different shoulds or shouldn'ts. And when we break them, we feel guilty. We feel like we're doing something wrong. And when we follow them, we feel like we're doing the right thing, and we feel like it makes us a good person. So food rules, basically, I can do this, I can't do that. It's kind of just like a list of exactly what it sounds like, rules to follow or break.
Why do we generally have food rules?
Well, again, I think we develop them over time from the messages that we receive from different people. Again, if you've done different diets, let's say keto or intermittent fasting or Weight Watchers, for example, there's obviously a set of rules or guidelines that come with that diet, right? So for keto, for example, there's a certain amount of carbohydrates you should eat a day, a certain amount of grams of fat you should have per day. So if you're someone that's followed that framework, you start to internalize that, I should eat this and I shouldn't eat that because that is or is not keto. Then if you go on and do something like Weight Watchers, okay, now I have a certain amount of points. And what starts to happen is the more you do all of these different diets and take all these different recommendations, they start to kind of conflict one another, right? Where on keto, avocados, for example, might be great because, they're high in fat, but maybe when you're on Weight Watchers, avocados are higher in points. So maybe then that's not what you're going for. So it's like we're always kind of looking for the next diet or the next best thing to help us with our relationship with food, but it actually tends to make things a bit more challenging because it just builds on all of those previously, existing food rules. And, they can come from our family members too. Growing up, I'm sure a lot of people listening to this maybe were taught to finish their food. Don't waste the food on your plate. Finish your food before you have dessert. We're kind of taught from a young age to listen to what someone else is saying rather than listening to what our body is telling us.
I think that messaging is wrong, as you stated, that when you were younger, you were sort of brought up, you got to finish everything on your plate. Do you think that is the correct way we should be teaching young people?
I don't think so. I really don't. Because again, it's separating us from this internal wisdom that we are all born with, right? Like when you are an infant, we cry, we need milk or formula or whatever it is we might be consuming, and we have enough of it, and when we're done, you push away. So we're all born with this innate wisdom, but again, it's really through our environment that we learn to disassociate with that wisdom, right? So I think I'm not a parent and I don't want to act as if I am, but I think the role of the parent is providing a variety of foods and then allowing the child to, take what that child needs. And there's always that fear that, oh, if I don't control, then they'll just go, they'll go crazy. But again, it's like we really do have that wisdom. And I think just because many parents themselves have been convinced by diet culture that they need to control, that kind of gets put on our kids as well.
Yeah. Do you think there's a fine line between, I guess, food rules and then also being the typical healthy?
Well, I think there's a fine line. There is a fine line because I think what's happening nowadays is that people are realizing that diets aren't really like trendy maybe as much anymore. And things have gotten warped into like, oh, it's about wellness, it's about health. But we know like there's the diagnosis of orthorexia now where health can get taken to an extreme, right? If it starts to become obsessive and it starts to impact our mental health and our socialization and things like that. Obviously, as a dietitian, I think paying attention to your health is wonderful. I think that's a great thing. But with everything in life, there's always that sweet spot and balance in the middle where we want to give enough attention to it that we're honoring our body and our health, but not so much that it becomes all consuming. And I think a lot of what can be recommended nowadays really does kind of tiptoe on that, right on that border.
So speaking about diet culture, it's such a big thing and there's so many confusing messages out there. How do people, I suppose, get around all that messaging and know what's right for them?
I think it's a lot of trial and error, honestly, but I think it's a decision to step away from it. And I think the more that you learn about diet culture and what it is and how much money is, how it's really pretty much all about money, right? $72 billion industry, just trying to convince you that you have to be XYZ in order to be loved or worthy or good enough or whatever it might be. You start to learn about like the roots of it and you start to see it for what it is. I think that makes it easier to step away from. But if you aren't even aware of how pervasive it is and how it's pretty much in, it's in our conversations at work, it's when you're at the hairdresser, it's just everyone's always talking, it's on social media. If you're not even aware that diet culture is there, it's going to be hard to step away from it because you don't even know that you're in it. So I think, the first step is like learning about diet culture and, learning about some of like intuitive eating and the anti-diet movement and health at every size and kind of doing some education around that so that you can, first and foremost, you need to be able to reject diet culture to figure out what works for you, because if you don't, you'll still kind of be searching for the answer within someone else versus looking for the answer within.
Yeah. I find that so many people are aware that diet culture exists, but why do you think we keep going back to diets and things like that?
I think two reasons. One, it's very convincing, right? Like they rebrand everything. They've caught on to the fact that, again, most people aren't using the word diet anymore. It's like, oh, it's a lifestyle. This is just a lifestyle now. I think maybe it's three reasons. Two, it's familiar, right? It's like, okay, well, I've done this before in the past, and maybe it worked for that short period of time where like we know it doesn't work in the long run. And then three, I think because our medical, healthcare system is so wrapped up, is such a weight-centric thing that it feels like people need to do that to be healthy, when you start to realize like actually diets are really not good for your health. But because we're so taught that weight equals health, I think there's that added pressure of like, oh, well, I have to do this for my health. So what else am I supposed to do?
Yeah. Do you think that medical professionals that are talking about the diet culture, not exactly, but as you said, just being healthy, do you think that's incorrect messaging as well? Because it tells people that you should be focusing on your weight?
I do. I mean, I obviously think we should be talking about, being healthy if you're a health professional and someone's coming to you for that information and they're asking how to do that. But it's not, we have the data to show that intentional weight loss diets do not work long term. They just don't. And they set us up for weight cycling, which we know is really, really bad for health. So if you're claiming that you're trying to do some intervention for the sake of health, going on a diet is probably the worst thing that you can do. And it's really kind of unethical when you think about it, because we have data. There's in history so far, there's nothing that produces long-term results. Nothing. So even if you want to argue that weight has some impact on something, okay, but we don't have any control over that. So why not just focus on the things that we do have control over, like getting more sleep, reducing our stress, incorporating fruits and vegetables, getting more movement and maybe some fiber. Like, I think the messaging on social media and when people think intuitive eating, a lot of times like the health portion of it feels like it's missing from the conversation, but it is very focused on health. It's just, let's focus on all of the other behaviors that we have control over. And weight is not a behavior, it's just kind of like a non-modifiable thing. It's just like, okay, I have brown hair and this is my weight. I can, try to force my hair to be blonde naturally. It's just not gonna happen, right?
Yeah. Why do
or
you think...
I can diet and then like it will still come back brown.
Why do you think they leave out all that other information that is so critical about diets and lifestyle?
Are you referring to doctors and like the medical?
Yeah.
Well, I guess I don't want to speak for all doctors, because I'm sure there are doctors out there that are asking those questions. Are you exercising? Are you doing XYZ? But I think there's a lot of like weight stigma in healthcare. And I think a lot of people in general just kind of make assumptions based off of people's body sizes, of like, you should do this or you shouldn't do that, or are you doing this or are you doing that? And like, people, sometimes the questions aren't even asked, the assumptions are just made. So I think it's really important to ask specific questions. And why is it left out? I mean, I think most people have just been trained in a weight-centric model, and it's kind of like anything else. I mean, the Semmelweis reflex, I think that's what it's called. I believe that was a doctor in the 1800s or something. I'm probably just butchering this fact, but he was a doctor that suggested washing your hands between surgery, because he believed that it would prevent like germs from getting passed along and infections from happening. And people had this knee-jerk reaction of like, that's dumb. Like, why would we do that? And of course, now we look back and we're like, well, duh, of course you'd wash your hands. But it's just kind of like challenging the paradigm. And I think that's kind of what's happening right now, where we've just been taught for so long that weight equals health, that anything outside of that isn't well received.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the guilty feeling that we often feel. Why can we feel guilty after we eat a particular food?
Yeah. Well, I think that goes back to the food rules, right? Like, if you see something as good and you see something as bad, if you eat that thing that you deem as bad, then you feel guilty for doing it, because therefore it makes you a bad person, or you did a bad thing. So the normal human response is guilt and shame. And, a lot of times I think people think that will motivate them to not eat that thing, but usually like shame and guilt are not very positive motivators, right? Like those emotions, usually good things don't come out of those emotions. So learning to maybe see food as, obviously all different foods have different nutritional value, right? Like, I'm not arguing that, like, what's in a salad is not the same as what's in a cheeseburger, right? But like, morally, they are equivalent. Their nutritional value is different, but one is not good and one is not bad. It's just food. It's just neutral. It's food. So maybe instead, for anyone listening, like, that's trying to get rid of that guilt, rather than seeing things as good or bad, asking like, how does food feel in my body? Does it give me energy? Does it digest well? Do I like the taste of it? Does it make me feel sluggish? And just kind of being more curious rather than being judgmental, because when we're judgmental, that's usually when those negative emotions like shame and guilt tend to pop up for us.
Yeah. Do you think that when you do label foods as good and bad, that that is something that we all do?
I think a majority of people do it, but I don't think everyone does that, because I think a lot of people that have been on diets or have been exposed to diet culture, which is most people, see it that way. And you can see it in our marketing and our advertising as well. I'm sure you've seen different products on the shelves of, I know there's one company, I believe it's like lesser evil or skinny this or no guilt that. And I mean, they're even playing into your emotions with just the name of the food. So it makes sense that, like, it makes a lot of sense why you feel how you feel once you eat that,
Yeah.
But I don't think everyone feels that way, because I don't feel that way. A lot of my clients, once they go through, the intuitive eating framework, like, they don't feel that way. So it's not everyone, but I think a majority do, unfortunately.
Yeah. And when you talk about feeling guilty after eating a particular food, how can you deal with that feeling and get over that feeling once you've eaten something that you feel guilty about eating?
Well, I think, again, like, going back to that question of being more, or that statement of being a bit more curious rather than being judgmental, asking yourself, why do I even feel guilty right now? Did I do anything bad? Like, this is just food. Who taught me? Where did this food rule or this belief come from? And again, just getting curious. How does this guilt, how do I behave when I feel this way? Is that serving me? Could I benefit from maybe shifting the way that I think about this food? Just kind of asking questions like that we're never encouraged to ask ourselves, right? Like, unless you're working with someone like a therapist or a dietitian, like, I don't know, I never was asked questions like that growing up, like, oh, why are you doing that? Or kind of just getting a bit more curious, right?
Yeah. I think guilt as well comes a lot with, sometimes people feel really uncomfortable after they've eaten something and they might feel bloated. Is there any
Yes.
strategies that you can suggest that can help people during that time?
Yeah, I think validating the fact that you may feel physically uncomfortable in your body, but also distinguishing that there's a difference between physical discomfort and then emotional guilt, right? Like, I feel physically uncomfortable in my body right now. Okay, maybe it's a matter of, like, what can I do right now to try to make myself feel a little bit more comfortable? Is it like putting different pants on? Is it, getting a blanket or something, whatever that might be. I think also acknowledging, like, okay, I'm uncomfortable, and then maybe focusing on something that they either like about themselves or they think is positive. Like, I'm really uncomfortable and I'm a great sister. I'm really uncomfortable in my body right now, and I'm working really hard on healing my relationship with food, right? So, like, acknowledging it, but also adding something on the other end of things that, make you feel a little bit better.
Yeah. And you talked earlier about that food rules are not the only type of rules that we can have in our life. You did mention exercise rules. What can they be?
Yeah, I mean, they can be any kind of rule, right? It could be, okay, I have to work out for X amount of minutes. I need to burn X amount of calories. I need to take this type of class. It might be, I have to exercise a certain amount to burn off something or to deserve to eat something. This type of movement doesn't count. All different things. So it's so individualized, and the more people I work with, it's like there are so many different roles you can really have.
Yeah.
But I think those are usually some of the most common ones of, I have to go for this long, I have to burn X amount of calories, I have to get this amount of steps in, things like that.
Okay. Do you think that's almost, I guess, controversial when I heard you about the steps, when I guess we're fed information that we should do 10,000 steps a day? Is that a rule that we should be following?
So I'm pretty sure that number is quite arbitrary. You start to dig into this stuff and you're like, does this have any scientific validity? Like, where does the 10,000 come from? And I think we need to remember that any recommendation that is made, something like that is given to the entire population, right? And so it's like, does a 95-year-old grandmother and a 28-year-old football player, like, are they going to be having the same activity level? I was actually just thinking this I was like, I should make an Instagram post out of this, like serving sizes, for example, right? Like, okay, here's a serving size and it's a half cup. So if that grandma and that football player is eating whatever that food might be, they should both eat a half cup. Like, no, they're probably going to want different amounts, right? And so it's like, we need to think that way about movement as well. As like, okay, sometimes, some days I might want to move more, some days I might want to move less, but it's all about figuring out like, well, what does feel good in my body? Personally, myself, I don't feel great when I sit a lot because it hurts my back. I start to get this pain down my legs. So going for a walk feels great. But just like with the food, starting to focus on, can I do this thing because it makes me feel good versus I have to do this thing out of obligation to earn something or to be good.
Right. And exercise rules, how can you deal with the guilty feeling of maybe not doing your exercise rules?
I think it's the same kind of way you would try to get rid of the guilt with the food rules. And in intuitive eating, this would be kind of like the challenging the food police principle. So starting to, one, write down the rules that you have about exercise or food. Maybe start to challenge them in a way of, one, does this serve me? You know, what happens when I do follow this rule? Does it, you know, bring me joy, or does it make me feel drained? You could start to challenge it in the sense of, is this really what the science says? Or are there people that don't follow this rule and they, you know, lead happy, healthy lives? You know, again, I think that the most helpful thing is like, does this belief serve me? Right? If it's causing guilt, it's causing shame. If something's eliciting that much negative emotion, it's probably not serving you. So how can I start to, you know, think in a way that feels a little bit better? And I think starting to pay attention to what emotions come up in response to your thoughts is so incredibly powerful, because I think a lot of times, many of us just kind of go through life without giving any thought to that, of just like, oh, I feel this way. It's like, well, why do I feel that way? What thought preceded that emotion, right? So just kind of, again, just getting curious and asking those questions, which can be tedious, but it's worth it.
Yeah. Is that what you do in your practice?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically with my clients, we go through the whole framework of intuitive eating, when we'll go through each step one by one. And that's definitely a lot of the work is, I always kind of say it's like nutrition talk therapy. It feels like a lot like therapy, rather than just working with a dietitian that gives you, here, follow this plan, or eat these foods, don't eat that foods. It's a lot of digging into your past of, you know, why do you feel that way? How was your experience growing up? You know, how did that make you feel? Like, how does this serve you? What are your thoughts about that? And getting these rules and beliefs down on paper, and then again, starting to reframe and challenge them. Because basically what it is creating a new belief system. Diet culture has its own set of beliefs and rules, and we've pretty much all internalized them. So it's kind of a matter of breaking those down and then creating something that's a bit more supportive.
Yeah. Why did you decide to do this? Because I believe that a lot of dietitians, well, traditionally as well, would not share this messaging and ask why. They would just give you a plan. So why did you want to do something different?
Yeah, well, I think you'll find that most dietitians become dietitians because we've had our own struggles with eating. And many, I don't want to say all, but many of us kind of go into the field either because we're completely preoccupied with food, or perhaps we think that I'm speaking for myself, we think that in going through that education, maybe I'll be able to figure it out for myself. So I mean, I became a dietitian back in 2013, and kind of like what I was saying earlier with the doctors, I myself was trained in a weight-centric model as well, you know, learning about things like BMI and calorie counting and all of those things that I no longer stand behind. And so now the reason I stand behind this is like, I had my own experience with eating disorders, and this was really the thing that freed me from all of that. And I think you'll find as well, like if there's other anti-diet, intuitive eating dietitians, they likely have a similar experience where they've done the other thing, it didn't work, they found this way of thinking and this type of framework, and you realize like how powerful it is. And I've seen it work firsthand in my life of, you know, it gave me the life that I always thought being in a certain body would give me, of like, I'm happy a lot, I've got a great relationship, you know, all of these nice things, I thought, oh, well, I have to look this way to be able to get those things first, when really it was like, no, I just need to, you know, change the way that I think, and I need to change those things. So, you know, that's kind of a personal experience,
Yeah.
short answer. It really helped me heal from, I mean, I had everything from anorexia when I was younger, binge eating, bulimia, orthorexia, pretty much everything there was. And to have gone through that, it's just, it's so life changing, and it's so amazing to see other people go through it as well.
Yeah. So you're talking about how you did suffer from an eating disorder in your earlier years. What triggered that?
Oh, I've tried to like pinpoint a memory or something of like, and then it started. I mean, I was like 14 or 15, and I just remember it was a very intense fascination with calories. I used to always read like magazine covers, you know. I remember being like 15, like that was my dream, was like being on the cover of a magazine, or like being a bikini model. Like that was my dream as like a 15-year-old, which now I'm like, oh, I wish I like, nothing wrong with that, but I'm like, there were so many other things I could be too. Right? So I don't know. I mean, I've tried to pinpoint so many things. I mean, my brother was born when I was about 12. So perhaps it was a bit of a cry for attention from my parents type of thing, because they were, you know, occupied with my brother right when I was kind of, you know, becoming a teenage girl. Being a teenage girl, there's so much pressure on what boys like, who, you know, who likes who, and you automatically associate like, oh, well, if a boy doesn't like me, that must be because of how I look. And so I think it was kind of like a combination of those things, and just something about counting calories and exercising a lot. It just became very just addictive, and no one really, what's most shocking is like, it didn't really alarm anyone, you know, especially looking back as like 14, you're essentially, you are a child, 14, 15, you're a child still. And how these behaviors are so normalized in our society that for a child to be waking up at whatever time to work out before school was seen as like inspirational rather than problematic, is like, oh, like a little, oh, it's just a little cringy. But that's kind of how it started for me. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of how these things start, is like dieting and calories. And that's always like, you know, I'm on TikTok now, and I'm always so nervous when I see these like very young, influential, or easily influenced kids like seeing this information and like trying this out, trying that out. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I know this path. Like, please don't go down it. Oh.
I do the same when I'm like looking at things. I'm like, no.
Like, don't do it.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm just a random person on TikTok, but please listen to me.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about your presence on TikTok. It's such a different way of sharing, I guess, a very inspirational, motivational message. Why did you decide to use a platform like that?
So I always feel like, I mean, the message that around your relationship with food and struggles in that arena are usually pretty, like, it's like a heavy topic, you know, it's like emotional, and I try to, I don't want to ever like minimize it, but to bring a little bit like more fun into it, of like, we can still work through this, but in a way that is like, again, my handle's like Feel Good Dietitian. Like, if you can laugh from this thing, if you can, you know, feel comforted in this thing, like, I think TikTok is great because you're able to kind of get your personality across versus just, you know, on Instagram. I mean, obviously there's the videos and the reels and stuff now, but you're kind of just behind like a little tweet or a little graphic or something, versus TikTok, I think it's nice to see like, hey, look, I'm a person, you're a person, let's chat about this stuff. Let's get on the same level here.
Yeah. Are you getting a good reaction from younger people, I guess, that it does appeal to because it's more creative?
You know, I think somewhat, but it seems like I tend to get a lot of comments from younger teens that will be like, that's not what you're supposed to do. Like, you're supposed to do this. And it's always just kind of interesting to me because, like, when I was like 12, adults to me, I would be like, okay, like, it's fine, it's fine. But maybe it's because it's like, it's on social media now that, like, you know, I don't know who that person is. I I feel like it's not as well received from people in high school and younger. Although, like, there could be people like silently. I don't know how old everyone is. Um, I think the intuitive eating message tends to sit a little bit better with slightly older, just because they've gone through that firsthand experience of like, I've done these diets and it's not fun and it's miserable and it didn't give me what I thought it would. Versus when you're young, you think you kind of know everything. You think, oh, it'll be different for me and blah, 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 and all those things. And so you're just kind of like, yeah, whatever this person's saying. Versus like once you're like 30 and you're like, yep, I've tried literally everything. So I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, yes, I can definitely agree with that one. So what is intuitive eating? What is the concept?
Yeah, so basically intuitive eating is a framework for eating based on 10 principles. It's a dynamic interplay of instinct, emotion, and rational thought. And it was created back in 1995 by two dietitians, Elise Resch and Evelyn Tribole. And it's gaining, it's gaining a lot of momentum right now, which is really awesome. But it's very hard to articulate what exactly it is until like you're in the process. But to kind of summarize it, it is listening to what your body is telling you and learning to honor and respect that.
Okay.
At the most like smallest minimized level. But again, it's made up of 10 principles. Rejecting the diet mentality, honoring your hunger and fullness, getting rid of those good food, bad foods by like making peace with food, challenging the food police, eating for satisfaction, moving your body in a way that feels good to you, respecting your body's genetic blueprint, and then honoring your health with gentle nutrition. So it's really touching on all the different areas of, I hate the word wellness, but wellness, like real wellness and authentic health. It's tackling self-care and boundaries and making sure your cup is full and, meeting your needs, whether that's sleep or having difficult conversations with people or food or whatever it is. It's not just a diet. It's not a diet at all. It's the opposite of that. It's not just, oh, eat this, not that. It's so much more.
Why do you think it's taken so long for it to receive such attention? I mean, it was designed in the 20th century and now we're in the next century and all of a sudden it's getting hype.
I know. I almost wonder if social media plays a role in, like, very recently, like the past couple of years, I think it's taken off tremendously. Kind of going back to that, I hope I'm not saying it wrong, Semmelweis, whatever it is, that reflex of like, I think it takes time to shift the paradigm. Back in 95, it was based on evidence, but not, I guess I should say, now there's 125 or 130 studies on intuitive eating versus back then it was based on other studies and then kind of like taking things away and putting it together to form this thing. Whereas now it is evidence-based. Intuitive eating is an evidence-based model. So I think now that we have more things backing it up, it's easier to get behind versus it just kind of being this concept of try this thing. There's more behind it, more like to stand on.
Do you think people care about the evidence-based scientific side of things, or they just care about results and looking a certain way?
It's not like, oh, yep, everyone does this or everyone does that. I think some people definitely do care. I think just because of our culture and how much emphasis has been put on body size, shape, look, all of the external, it almost feels like that just kind of matters more than like what the evidence says. But again, I think most people kind of get to a place where they're like, I don't even need the evidence because my life experience is my evidence of I've done the things and I don't feel good, or I've done the things and it didn't work long term. So it's almost like you have to have your own evidence of life experience for it to really stick.
Yeah. With intuitive eating, you said it's a lot about focusing on how your body is feeling. How do people know what their body is feeling? Like, how do you know if you're tired or if you're not, or if you're hungry or you're not?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of just learning to decipher those sensations. I think some are easier to identify than others. Feeling tired, I think, is an easier sensation for most people to identify than hunger might be. And tired, for example, maybe your eyelids feel heavy, maybe your legs feel kind of jello-y, maybe I don't know, your brain feels a bit foggy, right? So starting to correlate those bodily physical sensations with whatever you're naming it is, right? So hunger, maybe you feel it as my energy dips, maybe you feel it in your stomach, which a lot of people don't feel in their stomach. A lot of people don't feel that gnawing or gurgling or whatever it might be, or maybe you do, but it's not until you're ravenous. So starting to get back in touch with those more gentle signs of, oh, maybe I'm like, I was salivating, starting to think about food a little bit more, and my energy's dipped a little bit. And I think that's why it's helpful to work with someone, because initially it's like, I don't know what these cues mean, right? I'm hearing this, but I'm thinking that. And I think a lot of times what happens is our body gives us a cue and then our mind takes over because of what we've been taught of. Body gives you the cue of I'm hungry. Diet culture teaches you, oh, but are you thirsty? Right? So your body gave you the cue of like, I'm hungry. And then your mind's like, oh, but am I thirsty though? It's like, no, your body just told you the thing. So starting to ask yourself, is this a mind cue? Is this some rule or suggestion that someone outside of me has told me to do? Or is my body physically telling me something?
Wow, that's a really great way to look at it. I'm even like taking notes in my head. Wow.
Mind versus body cues, yeah.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, it's like I said, it's a dynamic interplay of instinct, emotion, and rational thought. So you have that instinct, right? That instinct that kind of comes from within the body. But then the emotions and the rational thought are still there. But a lot of times the thoughts that pop up are often not rational. They're those the distortions, from diet culture.
Yeah. Do you ever get people in your practice that say they don't have the time to tune into their body and do all this work?
Yeah, I mean, I have the people that I work with commit to working with me for 5 months. So I don't normally have someone, start working with me and then be like, I definitely can't do this, because they know the time commitment that is required moving forward. But that's definitely something I think most people haven't, I don't want to say an issue with, but like that's a challenge that many people face. Is like there's so many things to do. And that's one of the things we address is like boundary setting, filling your cup. Are you draining your cup with too many responsibilities? Are there things that you can say no to? I think that's a really big one, like learning to say no, not taking on too much onto your plate, delegating tasks, asking for help. Things that are just never talked about when you think about working with a dietitian or addressing your relationship with food, like things that it's really outside of that realm kind of, but directly impact how you eat. Because if you're overstressed, overworked, overextended, you're not going to be able to hear those cues of your body. So that's one of the biggest things, is like getting rid of, we call them attunement disruptors, those things that get in the way of our ability to hear what our body's telling us.
Wow. And I'm interested to know, in America, is eating disorders, things like anorexia, orthorexia, bulimia, are they common conversations amongst people?
It's hard to say because I'm in this space, and I feel like, it's like the people that we're in quarantine now. So I talk to like my friends, one of which from college, she's also a dietitian. So, and then everyone else that I've kind of created in my circle kind of is in this space. But I would say for the most part, no, definitely not. Like talk of dieting is for sure, like that's everywhere. But actual talk about those diagnoses, I don't think so. Is that common for you?
No, unfortunately not. Not as much as I guess we're hoping for. There's a lot of talk about mental health, but eating disorders just don't seem to get the rap that they deserve, because I feel like it's just so normalized. Everybody
Right.
wants
Well,
to be thin.
yeah. Well, there's so many disordered behaviors that are actually prescribed. That's
Yeah.
the problem, is like,
Yeah.
you can't, I've tweeted that before. It's like, it's hard to recover from an eating disorder when like people are praising you for it, or people are literally recommending you do those things, you
Yeah.
know? So it's like, you might not even realize that what you're doing is problematic. So
Yeah, I think
yeah,
that's the hard part, is that you never know, because there is so many people, I guess, pursuing disordered behaviors, and people don't know, well, is that really an eating disorder then?
mm-hmm.
So it's a difficult situation, but it's
Yeah.
very interesting to know that even this is going on in America. And how do you guys have any government support in America for like mental health plans or anything like that?
So I mean, I don't accept insurance. I also should say that like, I don't work with people that have a diagnosis of an eating disorder. I work with people that, if you have anorexia or you are binge eating, especially with anorexia though, intuitive eating cannot be that first step, because your rational thought, your ability to sense hunger and fullness will be completely inaccurate and not reliable. So it can be something to strive towards, but if you are struggling with an eating disorder, like intuitive eating might not be like the entry point. That might be something to kind of work towards. But I should say, like, I don't work with people with eating disorders, and I don't take insurance. So for me, it's like, it's all kind of like private pay. There are obviously like different hotlines and different resources like that that people can reach out to. And then, you know, if there's different insurance that covers, okay, I can go to this therapist or that dietitian, many do accept. But I think it's kind of, I think a lot more people are starting to not take insurance, to just, because they don't make it very easy for the provider. It's just quite complicated. How about you?
Yeah, so we're quite lucky actually. We in Australia, we have a lot of medical help plans. We have this thing called Medicare, which can really support us, and they give us a number amount of sessions. The trouble we
Oh,
have
cool.
is getting people to take those sessions and to realize that they do have a mental health issue, or
Mm-hmm.
seek help, because a lot of the time we have that mentality, oh, you know what, toughen up, princess, we'll get over it, just keep
Yes.
going. That
Yeah. Well, I
that
think that's the
culture.
difference. Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was
That's
just
right.
going to say that I think that's where the difference is, because I don't take insurance, people kind of actively seek me out, for like, they're ready to do this work. They want to, they are have acknowledged like diet culture and all the things, versus maybe if I accepted insurance and then someone just was like, oh, I have a dietitian session I can use, and they come in, I'm like, hey, maybe there's some stuff going on, and like you just said, it's like, nope, I'm not really aware of that yet. So I think it might kind of like, there's Medicare and Medicaid and stuff here as well, but I think it's just kind of like a different situation.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. And I think that that conversation, I mean, that's what we're trying to do, is just trying to initiate that go seek help, so that people
Yes,
can get that support.
exactly. Yes, and there's so many different, I know there's so many groups that have like contemplating recovery, like just even Google, like just Google eating disorder support or eating disorder recovery help, or there's, like I said, there's hotlines, there's resources out there, there are things. It just takes, you know, the readiness to do that.
Yeah. And finally, as we wrap up this interview, I kind of wanted to ask, who is the ideal person to start intuitive eating, and is there an ideal person?
I don't want to say there's an ideal person. I think it's just someone that's ready to hear the message. I mean, I actually just had a conversation with a client right before this, who was telling me back in 2010, she found a journal recently that in 2010 she wrote something about intuitive eating, but we only started doing this work like a couple months ago. So she had heard about it back then, but wasn't yet ready to receive it. So I think it's a matter of, a lot of times many people kind of have to hit this like diet rock bottom of kind of feeling like, I've tried everything and I can't do this anymore, which it's not a fun place to be because I've been there. But in order to, because you've realized like, oh, I've done, like I said, XYZ, and this hasn't given me what I've hoped for. So that's kind of when I think people start to look for a different type of route. So I think it's just someone that's ready to make that change, has an open mind, is willing to just kind of be patient. It's not a fast or easy process, but it is so incredibly powerful and worth it. Yeah, and like I said, it's our innate gift, it's our innate wisdom. Like we were born into this world as intuitive eaters. So I don't want to say there's a perfect person, because like it really is for everyone, because it's honoring your body, and that looks different for you, that looks different for me, it looks different for whoever else. It's the same framework applied to your life.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, thank you so much for today. And where can we find you?
Thank you. So if people want to learn more, they can go to my website. It's just www.laurencadillac.com. Cadillac like the car. Sometimes people think it's like with a K or something. But LaurenCadillac.com. I'm on Instagram at Feel Good Dietitian, and TikTok, same handle. And that's pretty much it.
Beautiful. And all those links and everything will be up on our Instagram page after this interview. So I just want to say thank you so much, Lauren, for joining us. And thank you so much for everyone out there for joining us on another Sunday session. It has been absolutely amazing, and I hope everyone out there got something out of it, because I definitely did. Awesome. And we'll tune in next month for another interview. But again, thank you everyone for joining.